Welcome to Second Sunday Forum, brought to you by the Peace and Social Order Committee of West Falmouth Preparative Meeting. Today, we enter our fourth year with welcoming back for his second talk, Gray Cox. And he will speak today on a Quaker approach to a wiser Earth in the era of artificial intelligence. And this comes from his book, which can be purchased in stores, online, and in the chat, you'll see the link, A Smarter Planet or wiserearth.com, where you can download the PDF. He'll speak about artificial intelligence, how it's transforming our world in ever more powerful and pervasive ways. How might it help promote what an FCNL phrase is, the world that we seek? In what ways does it threaten it? How can we as friends best understand the ethical, economic, political, cultural, technological, and spiritual challenges and opportunities that it presents? How can we as individuals and communities best speak to that of God in others and in the context of the powers of reasoning and the persuasion of being exercised through artificial intelligence? He'll present the highlights from his new book, which aims to offer a systemic Quaker perspective on these issues. This is being filmed and will be edited and, with permission of the speaker, be posted on our YouTube website. And we acknowledge that we're on Quaker land. With that, after Gray's talk, we'll have a question and answer period. Please welcome Gray Cox, who is Arcadia Friends Meeting, a clerk of the Quaker Institute for the Future, faculty on the College of the Atlantic Human Ecology Program, and author again of Smarter Planet or Wiser Earth, published this 2023. Welcome, Gray.
Hi, welcome all. It's just a real delight to be here. I really appreciate this opportunity to share with you all. And I give shout outs to friends that are here, but there's so many of you that I think I'll postpone that and just jump into the talk, if that's okay. So let me start, and I'm planning to go for maybe 40 minutes or so, and then have questions and dialogue. Okay. So let me start moving through here. I'm speaking to you from Passamcook in Wabanaki Territory up here in Maine, on Mount Desert Island. And I have been teaching for quite a while at College of the Atlantic, which is a school for human ecology. And that's informed part of my approach to artificial intelligence, because the school is a place for studying human ecology in an interdisciplinary, holistic way that looks at all the points of view involved. But also my experience of working with Quaker Institute for the Future has very strongly informed my thinking about AI. And in fact, we've had what we call a circle of discernment for some years now that this book, Smarter Planet or Wiser Earth, has come out of. The circles of discernment are part of the attempt of the Quaker Institute for the Future to do work that's sort of in the mold of a think tank that expresses Quaker values, but that also tries to practice Quaker process in the research process itself. So we hold meetings for worship for the conduct of research using some of the methods that come out of Quaker business processes. And today I want to start off by talking about why artificial intelligence is a concern in care for the earth and for Quakers, and then talk about two paradigms of rationality in ethics, economics, politics, technology, and spirituality. And those two paradigms I'm going to associate with sort of the idea or the vision of a smarter planet versus a wiser earth as two sorts of visions of where we might be going. And in part 3, I'll elaborate those in more detail. And then in part 4, talk about how we as Quakers might be called to respond to these two paths. So first of all, why is artificial intelligence a concern for us in care for the earth? And what are we talking about when we talk about it? For me, I approach these issues through the lens of a quote from Gandhi that has haunted me for a long time. He says in Hind Swaraj civilization is not an incurable disease, but we should always remember that the English people are currently afflicted by it. And I've thought about that for a long time, not just as a kind of a glib phrase, but as something that might reveal something fundamental about our world and our civilization. And in doing so, I've noted that, our global civilization nowadays is structured by ways of reasoning, of thinking, in economics, in governance, in technology, and morality that threaten our species with ecological collapse, climate change, the sixth great extinction, with pervasive injustice, and in wars, with nuclear weapons and the like, the threat of mutually assured destruction. And also the threat, increasingly, of domination by some kind of superhuman machine intelligence, or maybe instead a superhuman machine foolishness. And then fourth, a kind of moral relativism and the annihilation of meaning for human life that is increasingly pervading cultures all around the world. I would invite you to imagine an alien anthropologist from some distant planet on Alpha Centauri. And she comes to Earth as an anthropologist, and she's observing all this. And what would her first note back to her advisor, her thesis advisor, be? It might be something like this: a species which imposes such radical existential threats upon itself. What are they thinking? And you can imagine her alien graduate advisor might reply with some advice, something like this: clearly, their dominant reasoning strategies are, in a profound sense, irrational. The central research question should be, how are they thinking? So that's part of what I want to talk about here. Both how we are thinking in economics and politics and so on, and how that gets embedded in and epitomized by our conception of artificial intelligence that's increasingly pervading our life systems. So one way of defining how we are thinking is with a vision that IBM used in their ads back in 2008 and 2009 and has caught on. It's the vision of a smarter planet, as in smartphones, smart cars, smart schools, smart prisons, smart transportation systems, smart food systems, smart bombs, whatever that might mean. Their vision was this: bit by bit, our planet is getting smarter. By this we mean the systems that run the way we live and work as a society. Why now? Because the systems of our planet are increasingly instrumented, like with barcodes and transistors and so on, being monitored and controlled. More than 1 billion transistors per human, each one costing 1/10 millionth of a cent. Interconnected with 1 trillion networked things. And all these interconnections that are monitoring and controlling the eggs and sandwiches in our food system and the people in our schools and prisons, these are all connected with machines that are intelligent, increasingly. AI pervading the systems, monitoring and managing them. And all this is inevitable on the view of IBM. Why inevitable? In part, the idea is that the cost and the power of computation has been going down. Every 2 years or so, you can buy twice as much computing power for $1,000. And if trends continue, on one estimate, by the time we reach 2045 or so, for $1,000, you'll be able to buy a computer that will be able to process as many instructions per second as all the human brains on the planet could process. So where's that leading us? It's part of the question we want to get at today. But let's take a step back and ask the question, well, what is intelligence? What do we mean by intelligence in the first place? And my proposal for our purposes today is to use a very broad general definition that'll help us look at a lot of these broad-ranging phenomena in a more integrated way. By defining intelligence as the ability to sustain and or enhance one or more values in various contexts over time. So intelligence is the ability to get stuff done, to achieve goals or values, or express them. And notice with this definition, first of all, that intelligence is guided by values. If there aren't any values, then we can't really distinguish when we're making a mistake or not. There are no errors. If there's no destination you're trying to get to, there's no way to go wrong, right? But also intelligence interacts with the world. It involves reshaping or adapting either the self or the world in order to reflect those values. And third, it can take many, many forms. So calculating a solution in math, or negotiating an agreement in business or politics, writing a melody that expresses values and emotions, constructing a piece of furniture. Carpenters have a very distinctive kind of intelligence or set of intelligences. Sharing an intimate feeling, emotional intelligence, cooking a new dish, just keeping warm, nurturing an offspring can be values that get sustained in more or less intelligent ways. And so notice that intelligence can be exhibited by organisms and biological communities and machines and other systems, if in the sense that I'm defining it here. If there are values that guide it and they can be achieved, then intelligence is at work. And note further that intelligence in this sense does not require consciousness. Okay. So a tree that's growing from oak acorn to oak tree is guided by values and is realizing them in more or less intelligent ways, in the ways that it adapts to the soil or the sun and the like. It has a sort of hardwired into it more intelligent ways of responding. And note further that intelligence may be partial and limited. It can fall short of a wisdom that responds appropriately to the full range of values we should hold in our lived context. So it's helpful to contrast intelligence with wisdom, which we might define tentatively as systematic intelligence. Systematic intelligence that responds appropriately to the full range of values that we should hold in the context in which we live. In that sense, wisdom is human ecological, it's holistic. Okay. So in that context, how wisely are we managing our life systems here on Earth? Our forest systems or our food systems? And I'd like to suggest that often what's happening when we aim at smart systems, we're picking one or a few goals or values, like, for example, the maximization of board feet of timber per hectare of forest, or of tons of soybeans per hectare, and ignoring all the other values that forest or farmland can serve, the ecological services it can provide, the ways in which it provides employment for people, the ways in which it may provide a community with a sense of identity. And so often when we're being smarter in the way that we manage these resources, we may be less wise. And the same is true with other life systems, with our smart cities or smart healthcare systems or smart dispatch services for police or smart schools or smart weapons. By focusing on just one or a few values, we may be getting very fast somewhere, but not to the place where we want to really be, which involves a kind of comprehensive community-based look at all the relevant values and allows us to be wise. So notice then that in the way that I'm framing this, there are two connected projects in our civilization. And one of them is the project of creating an ever increasingly smarter planet, which involves AI, artificial intelligence, being applied in a way essentially that's extending the capitalist rationalization of the way we manage our food, our schools, our prisons, et cetera. And then tied to that is a second project that, especially in the last year and a half, people are very aware of, which is the attempt to create ever smarter AI that might lead to what people refer to as the singularity, a kind of artificial superintelligence that's so smart that it knows how to reprogram itself and that it can keep taking off and getting exponentially more intelligent to the point where it's impossible for us, given our brains and our ways of thinking, to even keep track of it, to even understand what it's doing. Okay. And these two projects involve two promises that motivate them. One is the promise of ever better management of our spaceship Earth, ever better production and efficiency in our food system, for example. And then secondly, ever better science and technology. There's the hope that with artificial superintelligence, we'll actually be able to solve problems like climate change and maybe even war, poverty, and so on, because the system will be so smart. And already there have been a number of real benefits of discoveries of ways of that proteins fold, for example. Discoveries that have been made that really draw on these new forms of artificial intelligence that have come out in recent years, especially since 2012. But there are these, I would know, two key perils or types of perils associated with these projects. And the first I've already kind of alluded to, which we could call the spaceship of fools kind of danger, which is that narrow AI that's managing for only one or a few values, that's managing our schools just to increase reading, writing, and arithmetic skills, and ignoring character development and development of community and providing safe places for kids and so on. And then secondly, the danger of what sometimes is referred to as the friendly AI problem or the values alignment problem, it's also referred to, which has to do with this question about will AI be ethical and friendly towards us, right? And that problem actually takes a little bit of unpacking. When we think of the friendly AI problem, a lot of times folks just have in mind, well, we want it to be friendly to us, to humans, but we don't necessarily want it to be just friendly to whoever happens to be its creator or its owner. What if it's created or owned by a rogue government or a rogue corporation, for example? It could be very bad. So in some sense, you have to figure out just what this is, but in some sense, we want it to be friendly to the good, to good people and good projects. But then that raises a further complication, which is if we do actually succeed in creating some kind of artificial superintelligence that's genuinely friendly towards the good and to people who do good in the world, we're going to have to worry about, well, what's it going to make of us? What's it going to make of these creatures that have been creating the sixth great extinction and structuring the world around weapons of mutually assured destruction and creating runaway technology? So, big questions. And I would like to now pause for a musical interlude to catch my breath and help me think about these things. I hope it'll be of help to you all too, because I think that in thinking about these issues, it's important to note that sometimes when we're thinking about where we're trying to get, it's helpful to slow down. And that, in fact, maybe slowing down is part of the process of getting there. It's getting to where we really want to be. So let me hope it helps me to frame my mind singing this. I hope it'll be a benefit to you. I'm gonna slow right down so I can get there sooner. I'm gonna slow right down so I can get there today. I'm gonna slow right down. Oh, maybe even come to a full stop. Oh, maybe if I come to a full stop, I'm gonna get there right away. Yes. Well, for me, where we really want to get as Quakers and as humans involves starting in a different place than we often do in terms of our ethics. Uh, so I want to say a little bit about two paradigms of rationality and begin by talking about the starting point for rationality and ethics. And one widely adopted kind of rule as a starting point for thinking about ethics is the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I want to suggest that that's not a very good rule in most situations. Why? Well, what it does is it invites me to take my values and impose them on everybody else, to treat them the way I would like to be treated if I was in their shoes. Right? In that sense, it's really an egocentric and kind of ethnocentric kind of rule. It makes sense and it's useful if you're in a relatively homogeneous community. If I'm on a playground, I'm a kindergartner, all the other kids are more or less like me, and I steal somebody else's toy, and the teacher comes over and says, "Now, Gray, what if Johnny did that to you?" You know, then thinking, "Oh, I should treat Johnny the way I would like to be treated," makes sense because we're pretty similar values. But in most situations in life, we're actually dealing with people who have at least somewhat different values and often dramatically different ones. And I would suggest a better starting point is what we might call the rainbow rule: do unto others as they would have you do unto them. This is a very pluralistic kind of approach to think about ethics. And it's more appropriate for a diverse, pluralistic world, one where you're asked not just to love your neighbors who are like you, but even love your enemies who might be quite different. A world in which you might, as a Buddhist, for example, be called to exercise compassion for all creatures. The golden rule, I think, works well in the context of colonization, whereas the rainbow rule works for collaborating in cultural and ecological exchange with others. But for it to work, we have to engage in a different kind of reasoning, a dialogical reasoning. So I'll say more about what I mean by that. And but to get to that, let's go to talking about this basic distinction I want to make between monological inference and dialogical reasoning. Okay. So monological inference is the kind of thing that's involved in traditional logic with Aristotle, where it's governed by algorithmic rules, like if all A are B and C is A, then C is B. So you can have arguments like all men are mortal, Socrates is a man. You run the algorithm and you get the output, Socrates is mortal, right? And this kind of reasoning, it has, three basic steps. You start with premises that are agreed on, and then you run the algorithmic rule, and then you get the output, the conclusion, okay? And the categorical syllogisms Aristotle looked at were not all that interesting generally, but when you get to Euclidean geometry, and using that kind of logic, you suddenly get proofs of very interesting proofs about the structure of space. And later with Isaac Newton and applying the same kind of logic to the laws of motion, you get really interesting kinds of proofs about physics that let you calculate, for example, how to shoot a rocket to the moon. That kind of rocket science thinking can be very powerful for manipulating the world. Notice this kind of reasoning is monological in the sense that it starts from one point of view, one set of premises, and then draws conclusions. So it can all be carried out by a single logical individual or single logical machine. And in ethics nowadays, in certainly lots of universities in the United States, moral philosophy is taught, and in a lot of contexts, public policy is practiced in ways that rely on kinds of reasoning that use this sort of monological inference and draw on really 18th century conceptions of ethics that come from Jeremy Bentham and Immanuel Kant, where the assumption is that to be ethical is to have your starting assumptions and throw in whatever data is relevant and then draw your conclusion. And when you face choices like the trolley problem, you might have the following sort of case to look at, where you're trying to decide if a trolley's coming down the track. Most of you are probably familiar with this kind of case. And it's going to run over 4 or 5 people unless you flip a switch. If you flip the switch, then it will run over some other person. And these folks all are oblivious. There's nothing you can do. You can't shout at them or whatever. In this hypothetical situation, you're just trying to decide, should you pull the switch and save the 5 and sacrifice the 1 or not? A lot of moral reasoning today looks at those kinds of cases from the point of view of, say, Bentham's utilitarianism, which starts off with the assumption that if an option yields the greatest net happiness to all concerned, choose it. And then adds the assumption that the option of pulling the trolley switch to kill 1 instead of 5 will yield the greatest net happiness, and results in the conclusion that you should pull the trolley switch. People looking at the issue from a human rights point of view or a Kantian point of view might argue instead that, you shouldn't pull it because you can't will this from the point of view of the person who's going to be sacrificed. Well, I'm developed this in just a little depth because I want to contrast it with a whole different way of thinking about ethics. So, I'll just invite you to imagine a further dilemma in which you're a surgeon who has 4 patients that are in need of organs for life-saving transplant. Okay. And there's a healthy patient that's asleep in the waiting room. He's just resting there. And you think to yourself as a doctor, gee, if I go in and I anesthetize him, I could harvest his organs and save the other 4 that need the life-saving transplants. And as a utilitarian, wouldn't that be the logical thing to do? That would sacrifice the 1 for the many, In this kind of case, which most people find kind of very revolting morally, is of the stuff that people talk about in a lot of ethics classes in universities. In one of those classes that's broadcast online at Harvard, one of the students in the back got up and said, well, I wouldn't sacrifice the healthy patient, but what I would do is try and find some way through volunteers or whatever to find one of the people that's going to die anyway and get them to sacrifice their organs for the others. Okay. Now, that kind of solution, obviously would require considerable thinking to think about where you go with it, how you would pick people and so on. But it offers a way out of the dilemma and of the kinds of dilemmas that people often face in ethics if they're stuck with monological reasoning. And it illustrates this second kind of reasoning that I want to talk about, dialogical reasoning. which is guided by not by algorithms, but by heuristic counsels or advices. So this second kind of reasoning, dialogical reasoning, it starts with not with assumptions that are given, but rather with a difference between two or more people, right? Two or more points of view. And they don't agree on the definitions of their terms, and they don't agree on their assumptions, whether we should, as what we should do. And the process of reasoning is actually one of negotiating those differences and problem solving and trying to do conflict transformation to arrive at a voluntary, genuine agreement. Okay? So as a reasoning, it's a different process than what logicians think of and what many people assume is rationality. And this kind of dialogical reasoning has been well studied. There are a variety of kinds of strategies in it. One is this basic guideline that you should multiply your options. When you face a dilemma, think of a third alternative. You know, like rather than sacrificing the healthy patient or letting the others die, or think of a further option, right? Another kind of strategy that's common for this kind of thinking is to focus on the interests that underlie people's positions, what they're favoring, in the hopes that you can discover other options that might satisfy everybody. So there are a number of strategies like this. I expect many of you are familiar with them from books like Getting DS and other kinds of texts on conflict resolution and transformation. I'd note that in the last 50 years, there's been an enormous amount of work and research on dialogical reasoning of lots of different kinds, including in the context of negotiations in business and in diplomacy, like with Getting DS, but also in community problem solving around environmental issues, like in planning with complexity. There are models from various religious traditions, like Quakers. So the Quaker process of seeking unity or communal discernment has been studied by Michael Sheeran in Beyond Majority Rule, and there's lots of ways in which it provides insight in this kind of tradition. Feminists have studied patterns of thinking that are characteristic often of the groups of women and girls that Carol Gilligan studied, and that folks like Sarah Ruddick have looked at. So anyway, I just want to emphasize indigenous communities, lots of communities around the world have forms of dialogical reasoning that have been well studied, that can be learned, and are teachable. One of the key traditions in all this, I think, is Gandhi's. And this is a point we can come back to, but I think Gandhi adds a really important element to dialogical reasoning, namely satyagraha, the role of kind of experimental, self-suffering action to discover truth, to demonstrate moral truths to others, and when it's adopted strategically, to defend moral truths by active resistance to oppression with sit-ins and boycotts and so on. These moral truths that Gandhi sought in his experiments with truth, as he called his own biography, they're not absolute, perfect, eternal truths. They are emergent, objective truths in the way in which truths in earth science and history and biology are. Again, that's a kind of point we can come back to. But for now, let me apply this idea of these two contrasting conceptions of reasoning to two paths for the future. And I'll note in my book, I go on to talk about ways in which dialogical reasoning can be employed in economics, politics, and technology. In economics, for example, our society is dominated by this vision of a rational economic man who's, and I use the word man on purpose, who's maximizing utility or profit or gross domestic product using calculative reasoning, logical inference of this monological kind. But there are other ways of thinking about how we deal with economic resources. They're the ways that we do it when we're talking in a family and trying to think about how to distribute resources in a family. We're interested in in making a future, making a history for our members of our family. And when we have a child who's having trouble learning at school and not performing as well on various criteria, we do not say to ourselves the way a businessman might, gee, this unit is not very productive. I think we'll just sell the second child off and see if we can buy a better one that's a better unit. We don't think that way in family contexts. We think very differently. So in my book, I develop these sorts of ideas in significant depth and would look forward to talking about that more as people are interested. But today I want to focus on the technology issue and how we might be thinking about technology in dialogical ways. And just note to sort of warm up to the idea that there are some very exciting things on the one hand. Work in bioacoustics, for example, that's described in Karen Baker's The Sounds of Life, shows how lots of new inexpensive ways of monitoring sound in the world, in both infra and ultrasound, are enabling people to listen to and also respond to elephants and bats and bees and even flowers. And they're discovering that there's all kinds of communication going on in the natural world, that turtles, for example, vocalize and communicate in important ways when they're hatching or when their mother's out in the river calling to their young to come towards the river. It's really quite remarkable. And the thing is that these sounds that are being recorded in bat caves and so on are being deciphered using the kinds of AI that ChatGPT and the other large language models that use generative AI are using. So there's this whole realm of communication and connection and intelligence in the natural world that's expressed through sound and increasingly in other ways that AI is going to be able to open us up to and be part of a kind of emerging internet of beings. And there are lots of folks who are looking at ways of collaborating between activists working on environmental issues and then technologists who are developing these kinds of technologies. In thinking in general about how to incorporate AI into work we do to get to the world we seek, I want to introduce 5 key principles. And one of them is that in the way we conceptualize it, make diagrams and so on, we should always think of the processes that we're involved with, whether it's a food system or a school system or what have you, as a human nature machine system. So we shouldn't think of AI as just something that sits in a computer somewhere. It's something that's part of a larger community-based process, right? So if we think of a food system that might have AI entering into it at various points in the production of soybeans or the transport of goods or the packaging them in foods and burgers and so on. As we do that, we should be framing this, sort of picture of the food system in the larger context of the earth and all the people on farms and the cities and AI systems and forests and so on. They're all part of the environing ecological system that it's part of. And be thinking about how each of them has voice, has intelligence, and how all these different forms of intelligence can be interconnected. Right? So this is one key example. There, list briefly the 5 as a whole that I would suggest as strategies for developing a dialogical technology, a dialogical AI system. And the first is that we should define our guiding goal as the pursuit of genuine voluntary agreements. So whether it's a school system or what have you, the activists and the technologists who are working should not think about the AI as just generating results or generating conclusions. We want to be collaborating in arriving at agreements with all the folks involved. And the methods we should use to get to those should be collaborative dialogue that's nonviolent, draws on Gandhian techniques when necessary. And then we should frame the structures and relationships in the way I was just describing in terms of people, nature, and machines as part of the whole. A 4th key principle, there's a lot to say about this, but I'll just mention it now, is that we should distribute the roles and the powers of all these elements of the system in just and appropriate ways, making sure that marginalized voices get heard and get empowered. And then fifth, we should make the system as open as possible to discerning and engaging with emergent realities in emergent contexts. So the world is changing a lot and continuously doing so in holistic ways. And so we need to find ways of using something like the kinds of discernment that Friends try to engage in meeting for worship, when they're trying to listen to the still small voices or the sound of the cannons in the distance, to have a sense of the whole and what's coming, to name that reality that yet still does not have a name, and to begin to cope and deal with it. And there are lots of ways of doing that. We can come back to some of them examples of doing this, but AI technologists and activists are collaborating in all sorts of ways around the world that are really interesting. I want to bring this to closer so we can get to some questions and discussion here. So let me just note that at this point in the history of AI, something significant has happened, in that the good old-fashioned AI that uses formal logic to build programs that think sort of like machines, like mechanically, they're still developing them. There are lots around all over the place in our systems. But there's also this newer form of AI that people associate, for example, with ChatGPT, that is not being built with formal logic, but is being trained. It's being allowed to evolve and be trained in a different way of interacting with it, different kind of programming. It's evolving like an organism. And a bit like the way you dog breeders breed dogs over time, or dog trainers train dogs over time through selective reinforcement of the genes or the behavior that they want to encourage. And just as the people who breed dogs and then train them do not really understand typically what the actual genetic structure of the dogs is, or what the neural pathways in their brains are. They know how to train them by giving them the feedback on the results, but they don't know what the mechanism is that's working there. Similarly, the people who are creating and training these new AI systems like ChatGPT do not understand, not know what the sort of nuts and bolts, as it were, DNA and neural pathways of these systems are. They're black boxes. They continue to surprise in what they can do, and they continue to be unpredictable in what the values are that are guiding their behavior. And this ChatGPT that I mentioned is sort of brought issues to a head in the last year and a couple months in the way that it's grown in use. I don't know how many of you have tried it out yet, but in terms of its growth, in the first week that it was made available, starting in November of 2022, it had 1 million users. And within 6 weeks, it had 100 million. It was the fastest growing adoption of a program in the history of the internet and of AI. And during this last year, there have just been all sorts of ways in which concerns about AI, this kind of AI, have been blossoming, and people started to worry about how it will affect education and law and everything else. So as Quakers, I think we should be thinking about these kinds of issues. And I could say more about it, but I think part of what we need to be doing is learning more and developing partnerships with activists and technologists. And I think we need to be, in economics, making a transition from being rational economic consumers to being history makers, to treating the whole world and reasoning about it in the way that we do in our family, rather than the way in which business people always do, exclusively. And then in politics, we need to be educating folks and addressing through action, concerns, drawing on dialogical reasoning in ways that I think most friends are pretty familiar with. And then let me just note that as Quakers, I think that we need to be worshipfully considering what queries we should be considering and what testimony we should adopt. And they might include queries like the following. Do we live in that power that recognizes all the diverse forms that intelligent, value-guided activity can take in the people, other natural organisms, and machines that we encounter? Do we seek in loving ways to advance their dialogue towards a wisdom in which truth prospers, guided by objective emergent values? In what ways does Friends' non-creedal approach to spirituality provide a path to interfaith dialogical reasoning? And what distinctive role might we be called to play in working for a wiser earth as Quakers? And I've been trying to think in terms of my own response to these kinds of queries, what might be a Quaker testimony around these kinds of things? And here I'll just share it kind of an initial draft and then open things up for discussion here. This would be a proposal to put on the table as what might be a Quaker testimony. That we should recall the most central of all testimonies of early Quakers was affirmed in the label that they chose for themselves: the Religious Society for Friends of the Truth. Artificial systems that subvert, co-opt, or destroy our collective abilities to reason and shared dialogue and discern truth are fundamentally inimical to our faith and our practice. It is imperative that Friends learn more about AI systems and consider how we can best act as individuals, as monthly meetings, and as a religious society to slow the development of these technologies and direct them in ways that are guided by loving reason and spirit-led discernment. At the dawn of the age of industrial nation states, Friends recognized the dangers of unfettered capitalism and unbridled militaries, and they sought out experiments that might let us see what love can do. Pennsylvania and elsewhere. We've entered now into a period of dramatic social and technological change that calls, perhaps even more pressingly, for spirit-led discernment and action rooted in a commitment to turning ever more fully towards truth and that ocean of light, which is the birthright resource of every human. And I'll copy the three queries in that testimony into the chat and open things up now for discussion, if that's okay. And Erica, are you, maybe you will
Okay. Usually we ask people to put things in the chat and they're not always good at that, but we can start with a question if there's nothing in the chat.
There is nothing in the chat.
Yeah, so is there somebody who has a question?
Werner's had their hands up.
Yes, correct. And the reactions, just there's a little hand that goes up and you can put that on and we can see that. We can scroll through and see that.
should be able to see it.
Rod and Ruth have a hand up now, Erica.
Okay, I can't see that. Thank you. Rod and Ruth, what's your question?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gray. A lot of questions and comments. Let me just run a couple. Are you in contact with the Quaker farmer, Dorn Cox, New Hampshire, Maine farmer, and his book, The Great Regeneration?
No, I'm not.
Anyway, I would suggest what you've outlined is very much in line with what he tries to carry out on his farms. And a second question along that line. I assume you're in touch with Keith Runyon, the new Quaker Earth Care leader, whose outline of his program, Lead with Satyagraha. Are you in touch with Keith?
I am. Actually, Keith is part of we have an ongoing circle of discernment at the Quaker Institute for the Future on AI. And Keith's been working on this issue for a while. And actually, he did a presentation at the summer research seminar.
Right.
Quaker Institute for the Future
That's why
last
I
summer.
assumed.
Yeah. No, thanks.
Okay. And
I'm glad you mentioned
third
him.
question, if you look at the Decolonizing Quaker website, I mean, it's a good first step, but it's primitive compared to the shift from monological to dialogical reasoning and bringing it right into our complicity in our hegemon or empire today and learning from the past, but really applying it where it needs to happen today. And I would hope the folks behind that would be in touch with you, so your book broadens the perspective that's really needed.
Thanks very much for that comment. And I will, where they're working, I would like to connect more with them. So that's a good nudge towards doing that. And the first farmer that you mentioned, if you could put the name and any contact info for them in the chat, that would be helpful.
Let's see.
Or email it to me later. Either way is fine.
Yeah.
I'll put my email and website in the chat as well. And just note that the book that this work is based on is you can buy it online where normally I would buy books, but as Erica mentioned, it's available as a free PDF if you want just a Creative Commons version, and you just go to that website and you can get it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rod. Yeah.
Halil, you have a question.
Yes, I have a question about how to go about encouraging the governments to mandate halts to deforestation. Forest clearing. That's a key way that we're worsening the environment, worsening the global climate change effect. Felled trees release all the carbon dioxide that they cleaned from the air, Earth's atmosphere. Trees are homes, and they're also nature's air purifiers. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. I think that's really important. Do you have any particular suggestion? I mean, there are lots of folks working on that kind of issue. And it varies depending on the part of the country or the world that you're looking at. But if you had any suggestions, I'd love to hear them.
Sure. While a student at Boston College, I was very active in the Environmental Action Committee, as well as the Recycling Committee. We're very big on recycling.
Yeah.
Plastic bottles.
Yeah.
Glass bottles and jars, cans.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, another, just in terms of the kinds of things I talked about today, another kind of option to be thinking about is companies that are managing forest lands. And also, a lot of cities now have urban forestry projects where they're managing their trees. There are a lot of wonderful, important trees in urban areas. Those, a lot of times those may be managed by experts, and part of what all this is about is saying, yeah, we need experts, but we also need everybody else, because everybody else has insights about all this stuff and the value that a particular tree has for them, or, functions that particular patches of forest may have for hunters or fishermen or bird watchers and so on, and all the organisms involved. So thinking very actively about, well, how do we get into the discussion? How do we get, to be part of the committee or group that's actually designing the AI program, that's managing the harvest plan for the forestry company managing land in Maine, or that's managing the urban forestry project for Boston or whatever. So I just would encourage people to start thinking in those terms, that that becoming part of the process, becoming part of the community, becoming part of the intelligence.
In Boston, Gray, Mayor Wu has started a program of planting trees in what they call heat deserts, where it's like in the poor neighborhoods where it's mostly concrete. So I see a lot of things happening. There's a question here. Now, how did I lose it? Mark Rains, maybe he could phrase this better. It says, how to teach about this in high schools, educating teachers to prepare the next generations. Oh, wait a minute, wait. Examples, vignettes, and simulations. Mark Rains.
And then I noticed Mark also had, how could AI help us with things that occur too slowly or too quickly for us to comprehend, and or too specifically focused internally or too broadly external to easily perceive? Yeah, and actually I would connect those two questions, because I think actually AI is providing ways of looking at large bodies of data that have been gathered over long periods of time or over large areas of space. And there isn't any reason why kids in school can't be accessing those and starting to work with them, and studying also what kinds of changes have happened in the woods and forest around their school, for example, or in the populations of immigrants in their neighborhood, right? That as school projects, you could start to use AI, and increasingly the systems like ChatGPT and Claude and so on are they're pretty accessible, and you can do you don't have to have 5 undergraduate courses in computer science in order to start doing interesting things with these things. It's there's a lot to be said about that, but it's the technology, especially if you have an ally who's a technologist person, is becoming extremely accessible in lots of ways for people. In terms of programs in schools, I'd be glad to share with you later a program that I wrote in something called Scratch, which MIT has it involves programming that's block coding, right? So you basically, actually, I won't take the time to show you, but it's sort of like you can just drag and click blocks of code, and so kids who are in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade can do this kind of coding, right? It is, and you can create little scenes and use video clips and stuff in it, and so it's very art visual, and you can have sound in it. And I created this program with Ethel, the ethical consultant robot, where she sort of starts off presenting the kids with a dilemma. There's a bear coming in the savannah. It's going to eat 1 of 2 people. You can save one of them with a bus. Which one should you save, right? But then after you sort of run the kids through kind of monological inference process of reasoning with this, Ethel then goes back and invites the kids to say, well, maybe you felt a little bit uncomfortable about this, and there are ways in which you wish there were more alternatives on the table. You could multiply the options. Or maybe you wish that there were other interests that would be considered in making the decision that weren't mentioned. Can you name some of those? And it's very easy for the kids to just put those in, and then Ethel sort of reflects them back. And as in summary, at the end of her little program, she says, you guys have some good ideas here. And what I would suggest is that you go back and reprogram me, so the next time your ideas will be part of what's presented, right? So the point of this is that it provides a very simple way that 4th graders, 5th graders can start to make the transition from monological reasoning using block code to thinking in dialogical terms about how do we multiply our options, how do we focus on interests, and so on, right? So that's one sort of proof of concept example, and then there are lots of others, and there are programs like Consul, CONSUL, who was based in Spain. They developed and continue to develop programming for municipal governments and state governments to involve the whole community in decision processes. And they're using collaborative ways of designing and redesigning that with GitHub and other systems. I've got a handout on this kind of stuff, Mark, so I'd be glad to send you some stuff about that. Okay.
Okay, we have a couple of other questions.
Yeah.
One was written by Larry Jordan. In taking steps to advocating wisdom through dialogical negotiations, have we lost the insights gained by the indigenous peoples that live on a WISER where all life lives synergistically? Nature poses challenges, etc., such earthquakes.
Yeah, I mean, I think Larry, I guess I would say that I believe we've, in most parts of the world, to a very significant extent, lost a lot of wisdom, a lot of intelligence that indigenous peoples had and continue to have, and sort of it gets marginalized or overlooked. And that part of what we need to be doing is learning and involving those folks. So in Maine, for example, I think the Wabanaki folks, Penobscot and Passamaquoddy and others are real active on issues around water. And there's just a lot of insight about how we relate to water systems in the Penobscot River and so on that are really important. And I would note that I had that one slide where I had a bunch of books listing ways in which people have been studying dialogical reasoning over the last 50 years. A lot of studies have been made of indigenous communities and ways in which in Africa, East Africa, West Africa, and Latin America, and all around the world, there are these indigenous communities who have been trying to listen to nature, listen to each other, listen to their neighbors, and be in dialogue in a holistic way that tries to create a kind of wiser earth community.
Well, my question is, why do we dumb down education in our civilization now where kids do not get to be able to learn all the things about what's going on in society and in nature and so forth, but we're advocating now that, oh, our way is the best way and this is the way we need to go.
May I
Yeah,
carry on
yeah,
Larry's comment? First of all, great, it's wonderful to hear you. And it's very deep and a lot to think about. So since I first met you, this is quite something. Larry's question echoes what I had in my heart. How can we get these ideas, the statement you made as friends, non-creedal, because our approach to spirituality provides a path for interfaith dialogue reasoning. And what role might we play? And I think that's a piece of what he was saying. How can we help from where we sit, whether we're our meeting or our church, and can we in fact relate to the public schools? A lot of us are doing different things in all of the places, but can we do something as a meeting, as a group, as Quaker Institute for the Future to make the change? We all discuss it. We all have opinions and we all wish it were better. But I would love it, not today, or when you plan to come again, and maybe Erica and others will encourage us to have a workshop where we work on strategies that will get us as Quakers at those people we might want to reach and make a change. I just thank you for coming. It's so rich, I hardly can believe what you've been able to say, and it's a big mouthful to think about, but I want to help be a part of the change. So I don't know if that's what
Thank you, Caroline.
That's great to hear, and I would thank you so much. And I would love to do a workshop of the kind you're talking about that would be about strategies where people can, bring the issues that everybody's already working on a lot of stuff. So pick up our buckets where they are, if it's in education or prisons or wherever, and ask, well, okay, how do we reach, if we're activists, how do we reach out to technologists who are designing systems that are structuring all of this, and how do we start to do that? That would be just a wonderful opportunity.
We have 3 more questions and we're running over a little bit, but it's not really that critical. Peter Garrett has been waiting for a while, and then there's a about 2 more questions in the chat.
Okay.
So, Peter?
Yeah, thank you. You're probably very aware that not only are the emissions that we keep putting up into the atmosphere for free, the greenhouse gases, but it's not only the ones that we're doing right now, but also the legacy ones that we've been putting up there since we were born and since the Industrial Revolution started. And there are various means of bringing those down. Have you considered the use of artificial intelligence for on the various methods that there are for bringing those concentrations of carbon dioxide and methane, particularly, down?
Well, so I think on the one hand, that's a great question. It seems like this is a major problem, and people should be working on it. In fact, lots of folks have been. I think one of the things to note is that the IPCCC and folks who are trying to understand what's going on with climate change are using a lot of AI to try and model Earth systems. Right? There are folks who are trying to have greener products like cars and so on, and greener systems for food production and so on, by making them smarter using AI. And I think that that's not a bad place to start, So finding out, well, how can we, reduce food waste in the food system to decrease the amount of food that ends up as waste and producing methane? So that's a great kind of thing to do. And sort of drawing on all the data that's out there and trying to make use of it is good. I think the caveat, in doing that is that we want to really try and do it in a wiser way so that we don't just empower a few experts to control everything, given just one or a few goals. I think with climate change in general, one of the concerns that some people have voiced that I think is certainly worth registering and considering is sometimes people focus just on climate change to the exclusion of questions about loss of species diversity and ecological habitat and so on. And we really have to look at all these issues, and the trade-offs to try and think about what would be a wise approach to them. So, starting with the reality that there are all these smart systems that are trying to address an issue like climate change and carbon footprint, and then saying, well, we, in a sense, in trying to get it wiser, what we mean is get it smarter. So we want more forms of intelligence to be included, to the point where we also include, for example, the intelligences that natural organisms have when they're evolving, when pests are evolving so that they can resist herbicides and pesticides. They have a kind of natural evolving intelligence that's at work there. And we have to sort of make that part of the dialogue instead of just trying to ignore it and assume that somehow we can chemically solve a problem that's really an ecological one. Anyway, that's an initial response, Peter. Thanks for the question.
2 of the
I'd love to
questions.
talk about more. Yeah.
2 questions appear to be related. One from Molly Cornell, who says, the image of ChatGPT is terrifying. I need ideas of what I can do about it. For starters, how could I recognize it when it's happening? And then Christine Gostenhofer says, AI as a tremendous financial corporate opportunity. Question, how might your dialogic reasoning build a base as a new paradigm to offset the current and justified fears around AI controlling humankind? For example, those algorithms, once tapped into of dialogic reason, can potentially program AI in favor of your strategies, but is this enough? And then there were 2 more questions, and we'll finish.
Yeah. So, for Molly's question, I think it's appropriate to be really concerned about ChatGPT and other forms of generative AI in that I think it's not just a question of what it can do now, but what's it going to be able to do soon. And it's not just a question of what it can do, but what can people do with it. And besides the large language models that are writing people's essays and writing legal briefs for lawyers, and people are using it now to, to give themselves recipes for what to cook from their refrigerator, but also to give them diet plans and exercise plans and health plans for their lives. I mean, there's a lot of ways it's being applied in the world. And increasingly, there are also people are developing what they're calling large action models that actually might be installed in your phone and be used to use your apps. And there isn't any short good answer to the question, how do you recognize it when it's happening? It's possible to have deep fakes of various kinds, both in text and visual images and other things, that pass. It's partly a question of how talented the people are who are using it. And so part of what we need to be thinking about is that I think we're entering into a new stage in the history of the world's economy. With industrial capitalism, we entered into a point where the barter and trade that could work in feudal systems in local communities had to be supplanted by money that would allow people to move quantities of goods around in markets that went long distances and stuff, right? And for money to work, it was discovered that you have to have somebody who sort of secures it. You have to control the printing presses for paper money. And you have to make sure that when somebody tries to pass money, that the institutions like the banks and businesses that are passing it around have regulations on them so that they don't cheat in various ways. And you also have to have, in effect, watermarks. You have to have things on the dollar bills and $100 bills that make it possible to say, oh, this is an authentic piece of currency, authentic dollar, right? And that's partly a technical problem to set up that whole money system that we have, but it's also partly a social problem. You have to have, the Secret Service or something like it to go around and arrest people if they, set up fake printing presses and stuff, right? And we're going to have something like that in the new digital economy. Our new world, is much more of an information economy, and the images and texts that are flowing are the stuff of it. And we need a way to verify when a text comes as, in a political campaign or as a contractual document from a business or whatever. We need a way to confirm that it actually has the author that it claims to have and represents the reality that it represents. And that's going to take a systematic system that would be like the Secret Service plus the bank regulations plus all that stuff to make it work. Maybe I should pause on that answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
Ralph Gentile says,
Yeah.
it seems to me that understanding the consequences of specific courses of action when applied to complicated systems implies an experimentalism, particularly vis-a-vis using neural network approach. That fits well with taking your time, but neural network solutions are for humans to follow, especially in understanding secondary and tertiary impacts. Thoughts?
Yeah, Ralph. So maybe responding to the question, the issues that you're raising, I think it's really important to note that these new generative AI systems that use the neural network approaches that have evolutionary kinds of strategies that they're employing are experimental, and the folks with ChatGPT, for example, they're trying out different ways to provide kind of reinforcement to, for example, make it not give misogynistic or racist remarks, and it's a little bit like working with dogs, where you're training them. where you're trying to get the dogs to behave in certain good ways. And if you leave the dog alone in a room with a baby, you don't want it to start biting the baby, right? So how do you train that? And you can't write a program that will make it never bite the baby. Instead, you have to sort of do this sort of training and hope that it works. And part of the challenge with the dogs is that, you know, even after a significant amount of breeding, the pool of genes that dogs come from are ultimately from wolves, right? And because you don't know the exact genetic code in any individual dog, you don't know when some sort of wolf gene is going to say, there's no alpha male around. This baby looks tasty. Let's eat it, right? You know, you really don't know. And with ChatGPT and these other large language models, you have this, I wanted to say in spades, but that's not a strong enough word, because the training data for these systems is not just, you know, the wolf genome or something of that size. It would take 500,000 years a person reading to read all the text that these things are being programmed with, right? Trained on. And it includes Mein Kampf. It includes all the most hideous trolls you can imagine on the internet. It includes, you know, Achilles, you know, and Agamemnon and all these people who sacrifice their children. And, you know, there's just a lot of stuff there that's part of the training data. And so the hope of training it all out is very problematic. There are different models for this. And one I would mention, hold up, is Anthropic is trying to develop what they call constitutional AI, where they try to program in ethical principles, drawing on principles from United Nations conventions on on human rights and stuff like that. And they also try to have sort of a tag team approach, where in effect two computer programs, one is trying to make the right decision and the other is trying to catch it making a mistake, and so that they're trying to increasingly get better. So there's strategies for that, and I think one really important question for friends to be looking at, and everybody to be looking at, is what kind of AI systems, if we use any, which ones should we be using? Maybe we should be using the Claude model from Anthropic rather than the ChatGPT, right? How can we put our money and put our government's money and put our states' budgets' money there, you know? And so I've got, if people are interested, I've drafted some proposed legislation for the state of Maine, or would work for any other state, that sort of tries to use the state as an institution where the state can say, as a state, we're not going to use any of these generative AI that may have wild genes, as it were, the black boxes, until we can be really clear about when and how to use them and use them appropriately. And we're going to try and pool with other states to create a market for ethical, legal, safe AI that we can use in our schools and our public libraries and in our state business offices, right? So anyway, I think people are interested now.
Thank you.
Be interested to talk about it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Did you get the Karen Gostenhofer's? I think it speaks to the last two questions you answered, but that's up for you. And then Rod Swerner and Ruth have another question, and we should probably, you can end it, you know, when you choose.
Okay. So for Karen's, yeah, I didn't get to that. Yeah, it's a tremendous financial corporate.
So how might your dialogic reasoning build a base for a new paradigm to offset the current and justified fears around AI controlling humankind? For example, those algorithms one taps into of dialogic reason can potentially program AI in favor of your strategies, but is it enough? Was her question.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways the answer I was just giving to Ralph sort of starts to point in the direction. I think we're going to need efforts at the global level, the national level, and the state level, as well as locally, to put in the kinds of institutions that create dialogical AI that is ethical. And one way to think about this is these new forms of AI that are learning through training and dialogue, right? They're conversational in many ways. They're learning the way children learn in many ways, increasingly, especially as they start to get connected to robotic bodies and sensors in the world. And so if you think of it, well, okay, you're creating not a Turing machine, but a Turing child, you know, then to raise an ethical child, it takes an ethical village. And similarly, to raise ethical AI, it's going to take an ethical global village. So that's part of the reason my book deals a lot with economics and politics and all this other stuff, because the question is, how do we get a global system with institutional structures that will motivate all this? And it's going to involve things like a Secret Service type system for verifying the authenticity of any texts that make truth claims. It's going to involve guaranteeing rights for privacy and so on. It's going to involve setting up institutions that do research and produce these things that have the right kind of motivational structures. It can't just be for profit. And so letting Microsoft and or Facebook, Meta, for example, run away and create super intelligent forms of AI by funding that's for advertising and maximizing income from that is a recipe for disaster. So I think we're going to have to control that kind of stuff.
And Rod and WISER?
Right. I'd just like to maybe comment the obvious, but Gray's gift and the gift of Quaker Institute of the Future is this great expansion of the possibilities of meeting for learning. I mean, we've gone into AI and the non-human intelligence, and that this expansion of meeting for learning is one of our gifts. And all Quaker institutions could use more consciousness of how it can be applied. For instance, FCNL, our advocacy groups now are starting a new theme on military expenditures, the budget. But we've been hitting our head against the wall for years. But what is needed is a understanding that we need to create more possibilities. And the gift of Quaker Institute is continually reminding the Quaker world just how Quaker process can accomplish this. And I obviously thank Greg for both the book and the presentation.
Yeah.
I join in that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope we'll follow up, Erica.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gray. Would you like to say a few parting words?
Yeah, first of all, thank you all very much for lots of great comments and questions and your very appreciative comments also. I really thank you a lot. And second, I would just emphasize, probably pretty obvious, I would be delighted to come by Zoom and talk with other meetings in Farmington or wherever you guys are by Zoom or in other ways. So I'm very open to that. And then third, I'm interested in working on this idea of a Quaker testimony on these things. I'm thinking about maybe trying to draft something for Friends Journal or maybe somewhere else. But if anybody's interested in sort of collaborating on that, you know, as a sort of a clearness committee for me writing it, or collaborators in a team writing it, whatever role, I would be really delighted to be in touch with you about it. And then the last thing I would mention is I'll send out a copy of the PDF of the slides that I used today, and maybe some other materials that I referred to, including I like to use for Mark things about education. And so if you guys are willing to share your emails and let me have an email list of folks to send things to, I would be delighted to follow up with that. Okay. And then also I want to thank Erica and Brenda for setting all this up. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's been a real delight to be back here a second time. And either here or somewhere else, maybe we can have this workshop.
It's a great idea. And thank you for starting our 4th year. And we're quarterly now, and I always look towards people who want to speak or know somebody they think they want to hear about. And it sounds like a great thing to do more workshops like we did with Paula Palmer and Virginia Swain last fall. So stay well and think well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Can I say one thing?
Oh, Sally?
Yes, please. I'm sitting here and thinking, how can I go from the philosophy and concept to the examples without getting lost in the examples? Because you outlined a wonderful philosophy and the concept, and how would I, for instance, teach that in kindergarten or in college? How can I work it out so that we won't go back to the old stuff? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I think you have a wonderful new concept, not new concept, but great concept. But in order to make that real and that we could do effectively something different, we need to, I need, for instance, I would need training. I would like to have a workshop where I could possibly develop some case study or a game for people to play so that we won't get lost in the, I don't know if I can explain it, but I've been sitting there and saying, yes, I know what intelligence means and how can we do this?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I'm sorry. I'm wondering also if there's not somebody that would collaborate with you that has different forms of knowing or discerning that could collaborate and create even wider workshop. Just a thought. What I cut you off. What were you going to say?
Yeah. Well, so let's come back to that point, Erica. But first, just for Sally, I think in terms of applying this kind of stuff, I think starting with something that you know about and you care about and work on, right? So it might be kindergarten, or if you're teaching about how to teach in kindergartens at the college level or something like that. Take some institution that you're involved with that you care about and start looking to see how AI is being used. In colleges now, lots of students are using AI to write essays and do homework and stuff like that, right? In kindergartens, lots of people are using AI to plan lesson plans and plan what they're going to do, and develop materials. In public schools, AI is being used to keep track of who attends, when they show up, who's tardy, when should somebody be referred to a social worker or a guidance counselor, things like that. So start looking for those kinds of things and think about the concerns you have about the system already, right? And how you might find somebody who's interested in these issues, but who's maybe more tech savvy, who's involved with actually setting up and running the program for the school with the AI, or who's a college student who's using ChatGPT, or who is somebody who's interested in social media and is concerned about the way those are affecting kids, right? And start having conversations with them. Have them over for tea or go visit with them and talk, and start to think about, well, maybe there's some positive things about all this stuff and there may be some negative things. How can we start to sort that out and do it in a real world concrete context? Does that make sense as a basic strategy? Yeah. And, try to find, somebody that you can build a relationship with. Because a lot of this, what this is about, dialogical reasoning is about relationships. It's about two or more people with different points of view that are trying to come to an agreement. And that often it takes time and it takes context. You know, put them in their context and understand where they're coming from. And part of what motivates that process and makes it last and succeed is that people care about each other because they're in a relationship with each other. So does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
To me,
Yeah. Yeah. And then Erica, I think collaborating, I mean, it would be great to collaborate on a workshop. And there could even be multiple workshops or multiple parts of a workshop with people who are, for example, using AI in the arts, or who are using it in doing bioacoustics and citizen science, or who are doing it on deliberative civil discourse and political reasoning about policy analysis for municipalities or states. That I think there are all sorts of collaborations like that could be really cool.
maybe you have an idea of who might be good on this for you. What kind of
I
panel?
sort of think, yeah, I could think about that. And then, but I think also it might be good to think about who, if we found who, the other way to go at it would be to start with what themes, if you had a group of people who wanted to do a panel, a workshop like this, and asked what their themes were that interested them, then we might actually recruit somebody who would be relevant. That would be the other. I could see it going either way.
Hey, Greg, can you hear me?
Yeah. Ellen?
Yes. Oh, I can't hear myself, but I'm just coming in at the very end. And I don't know how eloquent I can be. I just feel like a foreigner in the field of AI, and I have a lot of trepidation. And it's probably based on lack of knowledge or ease or comfort. I'm kind of an old-fashioned child psychotherapist who's worked with kids in trouble all my life and loved every minute of the mysteries and getting at things kind of organically and I guess I must have mistrust of the electronic world. I mean, I'm someone that has, my middle name could be analog. I'm teased about this. I still write letters. I have an analog watch. I don't even own a computer. I'm talking to you on my beloved iPhone. And maybe I'm an oddity, but I think AI is out of my comfort zone. And I've just been so in the world of children and teens all my life. I don't know how to, should I be pushing myself to get out of my comfort zone and explore? So I don't know, I've got a lot to say, and I just been a listener all this for your talk. And Gray, did you share any of your trepidations? I heard you say runaway. I lightened up when you said runaway technology, and I thought, yes, that's what I'm afraid of.
Yeah.
So does this make, I don't know if I'm being,
So,
anyway, that's it
yeah.
for me for the moment.
Yeah. Well, so Ellen, there's a lot to say about this, but let me just start by noting that I really got seriously interested in this stuff when I had a moment. It was one of those moments where you sort of recognize that something is an existential threat to humanity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like when you first, I remember during the Reagan era, I had a certain point where I realized that nuclear weapons were a big problem, and and I just sort of started to worry about it a lot, and then do peace research. And I had a similar moment in worrying about runaway AI technology, worrying about, well, will it be friendly to us if it's a lot smarter?
Yeah.
And then I started to realize, well, even if it's not a lot smarter than us, if AI is running lots of our life systems, is it wise?
Yeah.
Doing all this foolish, obsessive work on for very few goals and stuff. So anyway, I very much share anxieties, and I think I I didn't emphasize those in the talk, and I sort of try to frame them so that they're manageable. I think I think people should be really worried.
Yeah.
But I don't think people are often at their best in their thinking or their readiness to respond and work on issues if they just have this sort of, oh my God, it could all end tomorrow. So I sort of try to take a much more sort of I try to have a little bit more balanced.
Yeah. Oh, as a presenter, you'd have to.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but I think in terms of your concerns, I guess I would say to you, you should just start putting your ear down to the ground a little bit. Listen, talk to other people. Well, how is AI affecting them, and does it matter? And maybe living in rural Maine, you're going to be out of the loop for a lot of it.
Oh yeah.
Maybe that's okay. It takes people different at different rates to get into the future. And part of there's this wonderful image from Alvin Toffler's the Future Shock book, where he talks about how it's really important to have some people who are sort of like frontiers people who are going into the extreme future now and trying to live it. In this case would be like wiring themselves up and having headsets and implants and all that kind of stuff. And then there are other people who are sort of the Luddites who sort of resist, who they're like the people who are conserving the past, and you need sort of people in a full range across that spectrum to have ways of keeping our legacy forms of intelligence and community, but also experimenting with how to deal with things coming down the pipe. But I think a lot of stuff is coming. It's coming really quickly. So the one analogy I would use is that 30 years ago, 1994, the internet was just what we think of as the internet now, with images and text and sound and all this stuff, was just beginning, right? And if you think about the ways in which our meetings, like this meeting, and our learning schools, and ways kids keep blogs as part of their high school way of documenting their portfolios for employers, and just the way our world has been transformed by the internet, right, in the last 30 years. Well, I think that given the kinds of investment and the levels of excitement and stuff and levels of rates of adoption for AI that are going on now, something like that kind of profound change seems to be emerging, where it's going to happen the next, like 3 to 5 years. So sort of like you took the 30 years of change on the internet and switched it to 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debate about just how fast and how much change is going to happen and how successful AI is going to be and so on. But I just in terms of the way we frame thinking about this stuff, I think that there's good reason to think that we're entering into a period with that kind of rate of change around these issues. And so as Quakers, I think we sort of need to be aware of it and at least learning something about it, and thinking at least at some level about how it's going to impact the way we deal with race, with decolonization issues, with war, with security, with policing, just all these issues where people they're inventing new AI systems and buying them and putting them in place, and they're going to change the way everything works.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just say personally, emerging from the world of breast cancer, I think it's the AI contributions to medicine is, I embrace that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There may be some really quite remarkable things that happen very quickly.
Thank you for taking time to provide the balance to me in succinct paragraphs. I've gone way over in your time now.
Okay, want me to say something and then we can
just as a wrap up.
Can I just share an image?
Sure, anything you want.
Okay, this is a slide that I did not get a chance to, I didn't share. So I guess one further comment I would make is that, spirit-led, in the best Quaker sense, spirit-led dialogical reasoning is, I think, essential to being human. And incarnating that spirit-led dialogical reasoning in global economic and political and technological and spiritual institutions provides our only coherent hope for survival, giving life-enduring meaning through creating not just a smarter planet, but a wiser Earth. So I think we should feel called as Quakers to try and think about how we can let our lives speak by seeing what love can do in the dialogue with nature and machines and each other in this world that's being transformed continually. And I think it really calls for us to think of ourselves as potentially being a community out of which might come something like the Valiant 60 in the mid-1600s. People who would go and talk with the sultans of Turkey and everybody else, and go and create communities in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So really, really think of ourselves as a community that might play an important role in that human potential for a wiser Earth that's really guided by a spirit of love and of the divine that is present for us and that has come to teach its people its love.
Thank you, Gray Cox, for starting our 4th year of Second Sunday Forum, and we'll see you again, I'm sure.
Great. Thank you all. Thanks so much.
Thank
Really,
you.
very, very much. Okay.
Super.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.